It was a gloomy afternoon when I decided to visit St. John's Cemetery in Parramatta, Sydney. Known as the oldest European cemetery in Australia, it houses over 10,000 graves, each with its own story. The legends of ghostly apparitions and eerie sounds had always intrigued me, so I set out to see if the tales held any truth. As I walked through the iron gates, the atmosphere immediately felt heavy. The ancient headstones, some crumbling and weathered, stood as silent sentinels of the past. The sky was overcast, casting a gray pallor over the landscape, and a cold breeze rustled the leaves of the old eucalyptus trees that dotted the grounds. I wandered through the rows of graves, reading the inscriptions and wondering about the lives of those buried there. The air grew colder as the sun began to set, and an uneasy feeling settled over me. I had read stories of visitors encountering ghostly figures and hearing disembodied voices, but I was skeptical. That was about to change. I reached a particularly secluded section of the cemetery, where the graves seemed older and more neglected. The wind picked up, and I heard a faint whispering, almost too soft to make out. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. The whispering grew louder, and I could discern the words, though they were in a language I didn't understand. It felt as if the very air around me was speaking. Continuing further, I stumbled upon a large, ornate tombstone. The name had eroded over time, but the date of death read 1824. As I stood there, the temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath forming in the air. A sudden feeling of dread washed over me, and I turned to leave, only to freeze in my tracks. A figure, barely more than a wisp of smoke, stood a few feet away. It was the faint outline of a person, shimmering and translucent. The figure's head was bowed, and it seemed to be mourning at one of the graves. I rubbed my eyes, unable to believe what I was seeing. The apparition slowly lifted its head and turned towards me, its eyes empty and sorrowful. I felt a cold wave of fear, but I couldn't move. The figure extended a hand towards me, and I heard a soft, pleading moan. It was a sound filled with anguish and longing. As the apparition drew closer, I finally broke free of my paralysis and backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Just then, the figure dissipated into the air, leaving behind a chilling silence. I stood there, my mind racing, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The air was still cold, and I felt an overwhelming sadness, as if the spirit had transferred its sorrow to me. I decided it was time to leave. As I made my way back to the entrance, I heard faint footsteps behind me, but every time I turned around, there was nothing there. The whispering resumed, now sounding more like a chorus of voices, all lamenting in unison. Reaching the gates, I glanced back one last time. The cemetery looked just as it had when I arrived, but I knew now that it was far from ordinary. The spirits of St. John's were very much real, trapped in a state of eternal unrest. Their stories, their pain, and their unresolved fates lingered in the air, making the cemetery a portal to the past. Leaving St. John's Cemetery, I felt a profound sense of respect for the dead. The experience had shaken me to my core, proving that some places hold on to the echoes of those who once lived. The ghosts of St. John's are not mere legends. They are remnants of history, reaching out from beyond the grave to tell their stories and seek solace.